In 1978, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, the Nobel Prize-winning Russian writer and survivor of Soviet oppression, delivered a bombshell speech at Harvard University that shook the West to its core. Titled A World Split Apart, his address was a fearless critique of the moral and spiritual decay he saw in modern society. With unflinching honesty, Solzhenitsyn warned of the dangers of materialism, the loss of courage, and the misuse of freedom. His words were not just a critique, they were a call to action. What can we learn from his powerful message today? Let's dive into one of the most thought-provoking speeches of the 20th century and uncover why Solzhenitsyn's warning still resonates in our world today. Solzhenitsyn began his address by reflecting on Harvard's motto, Veritas, and the difficulty of pursuing truth in a world filled with distractions and illusions. He noted that truth is often bitter and uncomfortable, and while it may elude us, the illusion of knowing it can lead to dangerous misunderstandings. His speech might have some hard truths, but he wanted people to know he was speaking as a friend, not as an enemy. Solzhenitsyn's personal experiences under Soviet totalitarianism had given him a unique perspective on the fragility of freedom and the dangers of complacency. He sought to share these insights with his Western audience, warning them not to take their rights and privileges for granted. Solzhenitsyn identified a profound and multifaceted split in the world, far deeper than the political divide between the two superpowers of the time, the United States and the Soviet Union. While many viewed the Cold War as a purely political struggle, Solzhenitsyn argued that the rift was also cultural, spiritual, and philosophical. He criticized the West's tendency to oversimplify this divide, believing that diplomatic negotiations or military balance alone could resolve it. Instead, he warned, the split is a much profounder and a more alienating one, that the rifts are more than one can see at first glance. This deep, manifold split bears the danger of manifold disaster for all of us. He invoked the ancient wisdom that a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand, applying it to the global community. Solzhenitsyn believed that ignoring these deeper rifts would lead to disaster, and he urged the world to confront its divisions with honesty and courage. Solzhenitsyn lamented the West's failure to understand non-Western cultures, such as those of China, India, and the Muslim world. He argued that these civilizations were not simply underdeveloped versions of the West, but autonomous worlds with their own rich histories, values, and ways of life. He said, any ancient, deeply rooted autonomous culture, especially if it is spread on a wide part of the Earth's surface, constitutes an autonomous world, full of riddles and surprises to Western thinking. The West's historical arrogance and colonial mindset had blinded it to the intrinsic worth of these cultures, leading to a legacy of exploitation and misunderstanding. Solzhenitsyn also pointed out that even Russia, despite its proximity to Europe, had been consistently misunderstood by the West, particularly under communist rule. He warned that the West's inability to appreciate the diversity of human experience would hinder its ability to navigate the complexities of a globalized world. One of the most striking themes of Solzhenitsyn's speech was his critique of the decline of courage in the West. He observed that Western societies, particularly their ruling elites and intellectual classes, had lost the moral fortitude to stand up for their values in the face of adversity. This decline was evident in the West's reluctance to confront powerful aggressors and its tendency to compromise principles for the sake of comfort and convenience. Solzhenitsyn contrasted this with the courage of individuals in the East, who had endured immense suffering under oppressive regimes yet retained a sense of spiritual resilience. He warned that without a revival of courage, the West would continue to weaken, both morally and politically. Solzhenitsyn criticized the West's obsession with material well-being, arguing that it had come at the expense of spiritual and moral growth. While technological and social progress had created unprecedented levels of comfort and prosperity, it had also led to a sense of emptiness and dissatisfaction. He warned that this focus on materialism had eroded the West's ability to defend its values, as individuals were unwilling to risk their comfortable lives for the sake of higher principles. Solzhenitsyn drew on biological principles to argue that excessive safety and comfort were detrimental to the health of a society, as they stifled growth and resilience. Solzhenitsyn also critiqued the West's reliance on legalistic frameworks to govern society. While he acknowledged the importance of laws in protecting individual rights, he argued that an overemphasis on legalism had led to a neglect of moral responsibility. In the West, conflicts were often resolved by adhering to the letter of the law rather than the spirit of justice, creating a cold and impersonal society. Solzhenitsyn contrasted this with the lawlessness of the Soviet Union, where the absence of legal protections had led to widespread oppression. However, he warned that a society governed solely by legalistic principles was not worthy of humanity's higher potential. He called for a balance between legal rights and moral obligations, emphasizing the importance of self-restraint, sacrifice, and a sense of duty to the common good. He also expressed concern about the misuse of freedom, particularly the tendency to prioritize individual rights over communal responsibilities. He argued that the West's emphasis on personal liberty had created a society that was defenseless against the corrosion of evil. For example, he criticized the proliferation of pornography, crime, and violence in the media, which he saw as a misuse of freedom that harmed society, particularly young people. He said, "Destructive and irresponsible freedom has been granted boundless space. Society appears to have little defense against the abyss of human decadence." He also noted the paradox that, while the West had achieved unprecedented levels of freedom and prosperity, it had also seen a rise in crime and moral decay. Solzhenitsyn called for a re-evaluation of the direction of freedom, urging the West to focus not just on rights, but also on obligations. Solzhenitsyn reserved some of his harshest criticism for the Western press, which he accused of prioritizing profit and sensationalism over truth and moral responsibility. He argued that the press had become a powerful force in shaping public opinion, often at the expense of accuracy and integrity. He said, "The press can both simulate public opinion and miseducate it. Thus, we may see terrorists described as heroes or secret matters pertaining to one's nation's defense publicly revealed." He lamented the lack of accountability in the media, noting that misleading or false information often went uncorrected, leaving a lasting impact on public memory. Solzhenitsyn also criticized the press for intruding on privacy and glorifying destructive behavior under the guise of freedom of expression. Solzhenitsyn rejected the theory of convergence, which posited that the West and the Soviet Union would gradually become more similar over time. He argued that the two systems were fundamentally incompatible and that any attempt to merge them would require violence and compromise. He said, "Convergence inevitably means acceptance of the other side's defects too, and this is hardly desirable." He also warned that convergence would mean accepting the worst aspects of both systems, leading to further moral and spiritual decline. Solzhenitsyn's experiences in the Soviet Union had convinced him that socialism, in any form, was inherently destructive to the human spirit, and he urged the West not to view it as a viable alternative. In the final section of his speech, Solzhenitsyn called for a spiritual revival, urging humanity to rise above materialism and rediscover its moral and spiritual foundations. He argued that the pursuit of happiness, as defined by material comfort and pleasure, was ultimately empty and unfulfilling. Instead, he called for a life of purpose and moral growth, where individuals strive to leave the world better than they found it. He warned that without such a transformation, the West would continue to decline, and the world would face increasing peril. He concluded with a powerful message of hope, urging humanity to embrace a higher vision of life and to strive for spiritual ascent. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn's Harvard address was a profound and challenging critique of modern Western society, delivered with the moral authority of someone who had endured immense suffering and emerged with a deep understanding of human nature. His speech was a call to action, urging the West to confront its moral and spiritual crises and to rediscover the courage, integrity, and sense of purpose that had once defined it. While his message was often harsh and uncompromising, it was ultimately rooted in a profound love for humanity and a desire to see it rise above its current challenges. Solzhenitsyn's words remain as relevant today as they were in 1978, offering a timeless reminder of the importance of truth, courage, and spiritual growth in the face of adversity. No one on earth has any other way left but upward. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn.